Margarita's heart raced as she stepped off the sidewalk, the heavy hum of the city streets fading away with each step. Her shift had ended just a few minutes ago, but she wasn't ready to head home yet. The sky had dimmed, the city lights flickering on as the traffic buzzed around her. Then, as she crossed the intersection, a black Rolls-Royce slowed to a stop beside her. She hesitated, startled by the unexpected sight. The windows lowered, revealing a man, tall, well-dressed, and possessing an undeniable air of authority. He leaned forward slightly, locking eyes with her. "You," he said, voice smooth but commanding. "You have something I need." Margarita's stomach tightened. She was used to the occasional glance from men in expensive cars, but something about this one felt different. There was no flirtation, no insincerity, just sheer, unrelenting focus. She didn't answer, taking another step toward the curb. But the man, unfazed, pressed on. "Get in," he urged, his gaze never leaving her. "I have an offer for you, a proposition. It could change your life." His words lingered in the air, a strange tension filling the silence. Margarita paused, her mind racing. What kind of offer could a man like this have for her? What could he possibly want from a waitress like her? "I don't trust you," she finally responded, trying to push the unease out of her voice. "You've got the wrong idea." Charles Parker, the man in the car, didn't seem surprised. His eyes softened, and he spoke again, this time with a hint of sincerity. "I'm not what you think I am. I'm offering you a way out. You're in trouble. I can see it. But I have the means to help you. All I need is a favor." Margarita felt her guard starting to slip. She didn't know why, but his calm confidence was compelling. The desperation behind his words tugged at something deep inside her. The uncertainty of her life, her financial struggles, and a deep loneliness she couldn't shake. She took a deep breath and glanced around. The street was deserted. "Fine," she said, though she couldn't quite grasp what she was getting herself into. "I'll listen." Without another word, she opened the door and climbed into the sleek car. The engine roared to life as Charles drove off, his mansion looming in the distance, promising a world of luxury and secrets she wasn't sure she was ready to face. As the Rolls-Royce glided through the city streets, Margarita felt a knot tightening in her stomach. The wind outside grew colder as the car sped toward its destination. Her thoughts were racing, trying to process the strange turn her life had taken in just the last few minutes. She had no idea where she was going, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she was walking into something monumental. The car eventually turned down a long, winding driveway, the path lined with tall hedges and distant street lamps. Finally, they reached the gates of a sprawling estate, a mansion that seemed to stretch on forever. Charles Parker parked the car in front of the grand entrance, stepping out and opening the door for her. Margarita stared at the mansion, taken aback by its sheer size. She had seen plenty of mansions before, but this one was different. It was cold, imposing, like it had been built to intimidate and awe in equal measure. But what struck her the most was the loneliness it radiated, as though the house itself was waiting for someone to fill the emptiness inside. Charles, standing tall and proud, gestured for her to follow him. "Come on," he said quietly. "I'll show you where you'll be staying." She followed him hesitantly, trying to ignore the growing sense of discomfort. Inside, the mansion was even grander than the exterior. Opulent chandeliers hung from the ceilings, casting a soft glow on the marble floors. Each room was more luxurious than the last, filled with expensive art and furniture that looked like they belonged in a museum. As they walked down a long corridor, Charles spoke. "I know you're confused right now," he said, "but this is your chance, a chance to start over." Margarita nodded slowly, though she still didn't understand exactly what he meant. She had nothing to lose at this point, but something about this place, something about Charles, made her wonder if she was about to lose even more. They reached a room at the end of the hallway, and Charles opened the door, revealing a luxurious guest suite. "You'll be comfortable here," he said with a smile. "We'll talk tomorrow. Rest for now." Margarita stepped inside, still unsure of what she had just agreed to, but aware that her life had just been irrevocably changed. The night was quiet, but the silence in Charles's mansion was thick with unspoken words. Margarita lay awake in the plush bed, staring at the high ceiling, her mind racing. How had she ended up here? What was this man's game? And why did everything about him, his wealth, his power, feel so out of reach? She was lost in thought when she heard soft footsteps at the door. She sat up, startled, and saw Charles standing there, looking down at her with a serious expression. "I thought you might want to talk," he said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. Margarita hesitated, but nodded. She was curious after all. Something about him intrigued her. About what? Charles sat down at the edge of the bed, his gaze distant. "About why I'm doing this," he said softly. "About why I'm offering you a deal you won't find anywhere else." He paused, as if weighing whether to share something deeply personal. "I've had a difficult life," he continued. "2 failed marriages. Both of them left me when they realized that I wasn't just about the money. I gave them everything, but in the end it wasn't enough. They didn't love me, Margarita. They loved my wealth." His words hung heavy in the air, and for the first time, Margarita saw something in him that wasn't just a rich man's arrogance. There was a vulnerability in his voice, a sense of loss that mirrored her own struggles. "I don't trust easily anymore," he admitted, looking at her. "But I want something I can't get through normal means. I want a child, a legacy, someone to pass everything on to. But I can't do it alone, and I'm willing to offer you everything for that chance." Margarita stared at him, absorbing his words. He was a man who had everything but was still empty inside. Was she really just a means to an end for him? Or was there something more to this strange arrangement? But one thing was clear. This wasn't just about money. It was about something far more complex. And for better or worse, she was now part of it. The tension in the room was palpable as Charles watched Margarita closely. He could sense her hesitation, the uncertainty flickering behind her eyes. He had expected it. After all, this was no ordinary proposition. But he wasn't asking for anything unreasonable, he thought. "I'm not asking you to fall in love with me," he said, his voice steady but soft. "All I need is someone to carry my child, a child who will be mine, who will be part of me." Margarita, still processing everything, remained silent for a long moment. The silence stretched between them, thick with the weight of the decision she was about to make. Her mind swirled with thoughts of her past, of all the bad decisions she'd made, the betrayals, the losses. What was one more, really? And yet, a part of her knew that this could be her way out, a way to finally escape the life she had been stuck in for so long. She turned to face him, locking eyes with Charles. "And when the baby is born, what happens then? What do you want from me?" Charles leaned forward, his expression earnest. "You'll have everything you need. You'll leave here with money to start over, a new life. But that's not the most important part. The most important part is that you'll help me build something meaningful." Margarita swallowed, her heart racing as she tried to imagine the life he was offering her. It wasn't love. It wasn't affection. It was an arrangement. A deal. "I'll do it," she said quietly, almost to herself. The words felt foreign as they left her lips, but once spoken, there was no taking them back. Charles smiled, a faint but genuine smile. "Good," he said, rising from the bed. "This is the beginning of something bigger for both of us." As she watched him leave the room, Margarita's mind reeled. What had she just agreed to? She wasn't sure, but something told her that there was no turning back now. The days that followed were a blur. Margarita went through the motions, trying to shake off the unsettling feeling that had settled deep within her. The mansion had become her new world, and Charles had started to treat her like an almost revered guest, respectful, distant, and focused on the end goal. She had undergone the artificial insemination process with little fanfare. She wasn't given time to process the enormity of it. Instead, she was instructed to rest, to take care of herself for the sake of the child. And though she complied, part of her mind was always questioning. Was this really what she wanted? Was she just a pawn in Charles's game? But as the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, something unexpected began to happen. The baby growing inside her became more than just an arrangement. It became real. Every kick, every flutter, made her feel connected to this child in a way she hadn't anticipated. She wasn't just carrying Charles's legacy, she was carrying a piece of herself too. At night, when the mansion was quiet, Margarita would sit in front of the mirror, tracing her swollen belly with her fingers. She wondered if she would ever be able to leave this life behind, if she could ever let go of the child she was growing. Could she really walk away, as they had agreed, once the baby was born? Charles, on the other hand, remained distant. He visited occasionally, always keeping his focus on the baby, on the future. He seemed to believe that everything would go according to plan, that their deal would be enough to seal their fates. But what if it wasn't? Margarita's bond with the child continued to grow, each passing day strengthening the connection she had with the twins growing inside her. She had begun to talk to them, to whisper words of comfort and love, even though she knew she wasn't supposed to get too attached. The deal was simple, wasn't it? A transaction, nothing more. But with every passing day, it became harder to ignore the growing affection she felt for them. It wasn't just about fulfilling an obligation anymore. She had become their mother in every sense of the word, even if they weren't hers by traditional means. One day, Charles approached her with a strange look in his eyes, his usual calm demeanor replaced with something else, something closer to desperation. "You're becoming too attached," he said quietly, his words making Margarita's heart skip a beat. "I've been watching you." Margarita stood up from her seat by the window, startled. "What are you talking about?" "I can't have you getting emotionally invested," Charles continued, his voice tense. "This is just a business deal. Nothing more. Once the babies are born, you'll leave. We agreed on that." She stared at him, feeling a flicker of anger rise within her. "I'm not just some machine, Charles. I'm carrying your children, our children. I'm not going to walk away from them like it's nothing." Charles's expression softened, but only slightly. "This is what we agreed upon. You need to remember that." Margarita turned away, unable to meet his gaze. She didn't know what was happening between them, if there was something real or just the consequence of a deal gone too far. But one thing was certain. Her feelings for the children inside her were no longer just a part of the arrangement. They were real. And no matter how much she tried to suppress it, she couldn't turn her back on them. As the months passed, the emotional tension between Charles and Margarita became more palpable. Their agreement, once so clear-cut, had started to erode. What had started as a simple deal, an exchange of services, had grown into something far more complex. Charles's control over the situation began to slip, and Margarita's growing attachment to the twins only fueled his insecurity. The cold, calculating man who had first hired her seemed to disappear, replaced by someone who was grappling with feelings he hadn't expected. One night, as the two of them sat together in the mansion's grand dining room, Charles suddenly spoke, his voice quieter than usual. "I've been thinking," he said, "about everything. About you, about us, about what I'm asking of you." Margarita looked up, startled. "And?" "I don't want you to leave," Charles said. "I don't want you to walk away from the children, from this family. He paused, struggling to find the words. "I've never felt this way before." Margarita's heart skipped a beat. Was he saying what she thought he was saying? "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know how to explain it," Charles continued, looking down at his hands. "But I don't want this to be just a transaction. I want something more. I want a family." Margarita felt a lump form in her throat. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. This wasn't the man she had known, the man who had been cold and distant, focused only on the end goal. For the first time, she saw a glimmer of vulnerability in his eyes. "I can't leave," she said softly. "Not now. Not after everything." Charles's gaze met hers, and for a brief moment, they both realized that their paths had converged in a way neither had anticipated. The day of the delivery approached, and with it, the inevitable truth. The deal they had made would soon come to an end. The time had come for Margarita to make the ultimate choice. Would she follow through with the agreement, or would she risk everything for a future with Charles and the children? Charles was waiting for her decision, but Margarita could sense his own confusion, his own uncertainty. The man who had once been so sure of his plan was now questioning everything, torn between what he wanted and what he had promised her. Margarita lay awake one night, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing. She had promised herself she wouldn't get attached. She had promised herself she would leave. But now, everything had changed. The love she felt for the twins, the bond she had built with Charles, it was too real to ignore. In the early hours of the morning, she made her decision. Margarita packed her things in the quiet of the morning, her heart heavy with the weight of what was about to happen. She had kept her promise, as painful as it was. She had agreed to leave once the children were born, and it was time to honor that promise. But as she reached the door, ready to leave behind the life she had known, Charles appeared in the doorway, his eyes filled with desperation. "Please don't go," he pleaded, his voice breaking. "You can't leave us. You can't leave them." Tears filled Margarita's eyes as she looked at him. "I have to," she whispered. "I have to go." Charles stepped forward, grabbing her arm gently. "I don't want to lose you." Margarita stared at him, torn between what she had promised and the growing feelings she had developed for this man, for this family. "I can't leave," she said, her voice breaking. "Not now. Not ever." With those words, the deal was no longer just a deal. It was a life, a family, and a future they had both fought for in different ways. The airport terminal was empty, save for a few travelers rushing to catch their flights. Margarita stood there, her heart heavy as she looked at the two children in her arms, her children, the twins she had carried for so long. But as she took a step forward, Charles appeared in front of her, his eyes pleading. "Please don't go," he said softly. "You belong here, with us." She stopped in her tracks, her heart pounding. Could she really walk away? Could she leave everything behind? In that moment, Margarita knew that her life had changed forever. She had found a family, a purpose, and a future with Charles and the twins. She wasn't just a surrogate anymore. She was their mother. With a deep breath, Margarita made her decision. She turned to face Charles and said the words that would change everything. "I'm staying." And with that, their new beginning began.